Okay, so it's a question more about my own personal, how I came into this role, and I have to say I'm probably quite a newcomer to children's rights, having started in Eurochild in 2006, and whilst I knew the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child existed, I really didn't know very much about it. My background is really I've been in Brussels since 1997, and I've been facilitating networks. So I was first working in a network focusing on sort of exchange and environmental sector, and then I was working in a network promoting youth volunteering and facilitating activities and projects in that area. So my experience was really coming at it from European perspective, social policy perspective, and then I found myself discovering more and more around children's rights, which then you ask another question around what my values are, and it really fulfilled what I wanted to achieve in life, because it's all about self-expression, about facilitating empowerment, and having worked in the field of youth volunteering, and we were particularly interested in looking at how volunteering and international exchange can help young people come out of situations where they felt very disempowered. I saw how valuable it is to be able to work with them from the age of 0. So it was a kind of logical succession for the work that I've been doing at European level. I think, yes, I mean, it's a logical succession from where I was coming from. I mean, how you ask about my values in life, and I mean, those are always sort of evolving, but I think from a young age I was always interested in difference, in international exchange, being continually learning, curiosity about others. My family was always volunteering in this experiment with international living. We hosted many people from overseas. That brought me to Brussels and the international networking aspect. And then I think how children's rights fits into that is this idea that working with children to support their individual expression from the earliest age is very consistent with my values as an individual. And I'm very motivated in this job by the opportunity to meet with so many different inspirational people, different organisations, networks, working in completely different cultural settings, economic, social settings, different possibilities, but very much driven by the same vision of supporting and helping children realise their full potential. And that's a great opportunity and real privilege to be working at that level, I think. So, I mean, obviously the most important achievement is the ratification of the UNCRC Universal Convention. I mean, it has been the most universally ratified of any UN convention around the world. So obviously all the countries within Europe, including neighbouring countries, not just the European Union, have ratified. And so that in itself is an important achievement. And I think, you know, enormous progress will have been made in the discussions at national level about accession and ratification of the UNCRC. That doesn't mean to say that in practice it's made reality, or that it's necessarily in the consciousness of those people that were involved in its ratification even, and certainly it's been the extent to which it has filtered into the consciousness of other policymakers, professionals, families, teachers, children themselves, very, very differing levels across Europe. But just the fact that that's there, I think, is nonetheless an important achievement. And I think the work that the Council of Europe is doing, continues to do, to fight for children's rights is a great value, and we see some of the recommendations coming up from the Committee of Ministers, so that there is really positive, progressive work being done at a pan-European level. And then kind of in terms of the achievements, we'd have to look at specific countries, because you see some countries being so much more progressive, and Sweden is obviously one, being a strong owner of the UNCRC development and implementation, and the way that has filtered down into schools, into early childhood centres, into the mindset of professionals. I mean, I think there's a great aspiration for many of us to see how children's rights is embedded in more or less in society. And coming from the UK, you know, and being close to Wales, since they're so active in Eurochild, and they've just recently embedded the UNC and CRC into all of their legislative process. So, you know, there are steps being taken across the European Union that we can look to for inspiration, but we have a long way to go. I mean, I think more in relation to what we can achieve within Eurochild. I mean, we're creating a growing movement of professionals, individuals in different sectors who have this common vision, common goal of the realisation of children's rights. And I think we can only achieve it through the wider network of this emphasis on awareness, this filtering down of what children's rights means, and I think there's still a long way to go in achieving that level of awareness in different levels of society. For us at European Union level, obviously our biggest challenge is how do we promote children's rights issues across European Union policies and programming and funding and legislation, and we are really a long way from going. I think there's a real disconnect with how we envisage children's rights being mainstreamed, being integrated across EU policies, and the way that the European Union institutions, and particularly the European Commission, has interpreted their role in this area. So there's still a big gap, I think, in being able to communicate our vision and enable that they will then own it. And the way that, as they see it, the European Commission particularly see it, is a very, very limited scope for the UNCRC, limited to the Fundamental Rights Charter and Article 21, and they have very little vision of how that will be spread throughout all of the work that they do. So we still have quite a long way to go in working with the European Union institutions to get them to own this vision. And then challenges at national level. I mean, we now with the economic crisis, the way that governments are responding to the economic crisis, they're a long, long way from seeing children as being a priority in how they tackle the policy responses. But that's really how we can mobilise the membership and give the voice to the organisations working with and for children, and to children and young people themselves as well. So, I mean, children's participation is such a broad concept, stemming from Article 12 of the UNCRC, that every child has the right to be heard, and I think it's a fundamental shift in the way that we perceive children and their capacities, and our vision within Eurochild, and I'm completely convinced by that, is that a child from the age of 0 has the possibility to express what they want, what they need, and that we as adults have a duty and obligation to be trying to listen and understand where they're coming from, not just our own perceptions of what they need and who they are. So it's really a process that begins in the home, with the family, how parents can support and engage children to express themselves, express their own needs, and questioning continually the values that adults are giving them. I mean, it's not to say that we as adults don't have knowledge or experience to impart to children, but then our duty is not to get them to take that on board regardless, but rather to think about what it means for them and learn how they can integrate that into their own self and knowledge and awareness. So it's fundamental to, I think, growing up with self-esteem, with empowerment, all of those values that I think everybody would aspire to. But what that means in terms of facilitating children's participation, and we can promote those values in the home by promoting positive parenting and supporting families and training parents and giving them all the tools that they would need. We can also help, huge issue of how does children's participation take place in schools, in early education centres, how do teachers perceive children's participation. There's lots of movements around school councils. Are they the best way that children can voice themselves, give their own views? I think it's all questioning the whole education system. Then there are initiatives taking place at the community level or organisations that support the most vulnerable children, how do they ensure that those children are not seen just as vulnerable but are seen as actors in their own right to change their own situations? And certainly then at a political level, how do we ensure that those people who are making policies affecting children also take into account the views and experiences of children? And to some extent it might be symbolic, but even that I think is important, to acknowledge that children should have a voice and should be able to say what they feel, and that's a process for the children involved. It creates much greater self-esteem and empowerment, but it also changes the mindset of adults to think more creatively about how they can involve and engage with children, rather than just seeing them as passive recipients of support and policies. We still have a long way to go, I think, to achieve children's rights in Europe. As I mentioned before, the sort of existing challenges in level of awareness and certainly within the European Union in bringing this on board. There's certainly at European Union, we've seen huge progress, for example, in equality legislation, women's rights and gender equality, in disability rights, and somehow it's difficult to get to that next step with children. There's this perception that they just don't have the capacity to be able to contribute in that same way, and I think that's a real challenge for us to take it to that next level, and understand that children are individuals in their own right and should have policies that are supporting them, aside from the policies that are supporting the families or supporting schools or whatever else policy area. Just think of children in their own right. So we do have a long way to go, but I think we have a role to play in that alongside many of our other partners that we are working together with.